You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art Ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art Ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood. I previously made an episode about Fallen Astronaut from 1971, but as I'm posting daily mini episodes in the run-up to this year's Arts Madness tournament, I want to make sure I'm also creating some newer content and expanding on old favorites. So this is kind of a new-ish, expanded version of one of the more popular episodes I made a while back. And for new listeners who may have just stumbled onto the show, if you're not sure what I'm talking about with the Arts Madness tournament, check the links in the show notes. Now, on with the actual episode. Today, I thought it'd be fun to talk about art in outer space because apparently that's a real thing that has happened repeatedly. In 1969, NASA landed the first astronauts on the moon. It was a relatively short stay given the distance they had traveled to get there and the years it took for preparing for that voyage. Most people don't know this, but just a few years later, the Apollo 15 crew left an astronaut behind to remain on the moon since 1971. Okay, not a real astronaut. It was a sculpture called Fallen Astronaut. It all started here on Earth at a dinner party. Paul van Hoeydonck, a Belgian artist known for his paintings and prints, was attending a dinner party where he met David Scott, one of the astronauts slated to go to the moon on the Apollo 15 mission. As they were talking, they started thinking about the monumental achievement of putting people in outer space and on the moon. All the teams of scientists working for years building off the work of previous generations, and of course, those who had made the ultimate sacrifice, losing their lives in the pursuit of advancing space exploration. They thought it would be nice to make some sort of monument to commemorate the fallen astronauts. What better location than the moon? It's kind of beautiful when you think about it, a monument to those who had pushed themselves as far as they could go, losing their lives for space exploration, having a memorial placed at the absolute outermost bound that any human has ever made it to. While it may seem like fun dinner party conversation to imagine such a monument, transitioning from imagination to reality required them to work out some logistics. First off, it had to be small and light. The space capsule was rather cramped, not to mention the fact that more weight in the cargo would require more rocket fuel to take off. There are some differing accounts, but from what I read, another reason the statue needed to be small was because the astronaut, David Scott, smuggled it aboard. He may or may not have let NASA in on his plan, which, when you think about it, was fairly problematic. NASA engineers have to carefully consider all sorts of things that we regularly just don't. For example, only certain foods are allowed to be brought on a mission. I read that on another mission, an astronaut had smuggled aboard a sandwich, and he said, looking back on it, it was a terrible idea because crumbs floating around in a space capsule could get into the instruments, causing critical systems to fail. I mean, back then, they were traveling into the unknown with computer systems less powerful and less resilient than the device you're using to listen to this podcast. Now, on the topic of resilience, the monument needed to be made of a material that would be durable and able to withstand the extremes of the moon. Van Hoeydonck made a very modern-looking 3.5-inch aluminum statue, reducing a human figure to a collection of arced forms and clean lines. Van Hoeydonck and Scott agreed that it was important for it to symbolize a human generally, but not look like it came from a specific culture. Scott's account is that it represented the fallen crew members of various space missions, which is why he created a small plaque listing the names of several American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts who had passed. Van Hoeydonck has stated that, from his perspective, it was meant to represent humanity more broadly and not just those crew members. Of course, the person installing the piece would get the ultimate say. So in 1971, David Scott placed Fallen Astronaut along with the plaque on the moon and took a photograph documenting the work. It's remained there ever since. While it may or may not have been smuggled aboard Apollo 15, obviously NASA eventually got word of it. There was a minor dust-up when Van Hoeydonck sought to sell copies of the statue. He claimed there was an agreement that he could sell up to 950 copies of Fallen Astronaut. NASA, however, has a very strict policy against commercial exploitation of U.S. government space programs, and eventually he gave up on the idea of selling replicas of the piece. Although supposedly at least one was sold to a private collector. There is another copy in the Smithsonian, and there were other replicas produced that Van Hoeydonck had ready to sell, but I guess kept in storage for years until he eventually passed away. Interestingly, though, this was not the first artwork in space or even the first artwork on the moon. In 1969, 6 artists made small engravings on a ceramic tile. The work, called Moon Museum, features etchings of drawings by 6 of the top artists from the 1960s. Robert Rauschenberg, David Novros, John Chamberlain, Klaus Oldenburg, Forrest Myers, and Andy Warhol. Now, Forrest Myers had come up with the idea, quote, to bring together 6 great artists and create a tiny museum on the moon, end quote. And when I say it was a tiny museum, I mean tiny. The piece was roughly the size of a postage stamp. Apparently, when Myers brought the idea to NASA, though, they were less than enthusiastic about it. Still, a scientist, Fred Wallhauer, agreed to engrave the sketches onto a tile and had a friend of his make sure it was placed on the moon on November 12, 1969. An anonymous engineer referred to simply as John F. is said to have attached the small tile to the Apollo 12 lunar module and sent a telegram confirming, quote, "You're on A-OK, all systems go," end quote. Although NASA has never officially confirmed the piece made it to the moon. Still, we can go back even further. On March 18th, 1965, high above the Earth, history was made not just for space exploration, but for human creativity. Aboard the Voskhod 2 spacecraft, the Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov, secured by a tether, floated into the void. He became the first human to conduct a spacewalk. But this was not his only first that day. Equipped with a set of colored pencils strapped to his spacesuit, Leonov, an accomplished artist, observed the breathtaking spectacle of a sunrise from orbit. He created a sketch capturing the scene, the vibrant hues of the Earth's atmosphere illuminated by the rising sun. This seemingly simple act transformed Leonov into the first human to create an artwork in the vacuum of space. This 1965 drawing of a sunrise from orbit was a watershed moment in art history, not just for its unique location of creation, but for the profound shift in perspective it represented. You might say it was the genesis of a new genre of art, born from the direct experience of space, and it foreshadowed a growing awareness of Earth's fragility and interconnectedness. Leonov's sketch was a precursor to the iconic images like Earthrise and the blue marble captured by later Apollo missions, which visually demonstrated Earth's solitary beauty suspended in the vast darkness of space. These works, including Leonov's, contributed to a growing understanding of what's been called the overview effect. A mental shift reported by many astronauts who, upon seeing Earth from space, experience a profound sense of awe, interconnectedness, and a heightened awareness of our planet's vulnerability. Leonov's drawing, created in the earliest days of space exploration, was an early artistic expression of this perspective, marking a move away from earthbound representations of our world and towards a cosmic view that placed humanity within a much larger, universal context. And in that context, I think it's all the more beautiful and powerful that Fallen Astronaut was left with a plaque commemorating not only the American astronauts, but also the cosmonauts, to show that honoring courage, sacrifice, and our shared humanity will be more enduring than the animosity and rivalries that divide people. Now, I want to look a bit at the man behind the artwork. So after a short break, we're going to focus on Paul van Hoeydonck. Paul van Hoeydonck was born in Antwerp, Belgium on October 2nd, 1925. He was an artist who constantly redefined the boundaries of his craft. While he achieved international recognition for his Fallen Astronaut, the small aluminum sculpture placed on the moon in 1971, this iconic piece represents just one facet of a long and multifaceted career. Van Hoeydonck's artistic journey was marked by experimentation, innovation, and a fascination with the interplay of form, space, and technology. Van Hoeydonck's formal art education began at the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Antwerp, where he studied painting. He quickly gravitated, though, towards three-dimensional forms and abstract expression. The influence of modern art movements like constructivism and surrealism is evident in his early work, which explored geometric shapes and dreamlike imagery. Even in these formative years, Van Hoeydonck demonstrated a willingness to break from tradition and forge his own artistic path. A pivotal moment in his career came in the 1950s when he began working with plexiglass. The transparent plastic material opened up new possibilities for his artistic exploration. He began creating sculptures with clean, smooth surfaces, often incorporating light and movement to enhance their visual impact. These works demonstrated his growing interest in the relationship between form and space, a theme that would remain central to his art throughout his life. He was exploring the potential of new materials and technologies, a forward-thinking approach that positioned him at the forefront of contemporary art. By the time he met David Scott at that dinner party leading to the Fallen Astronaut Commission, Van Hoeydonck was already a well-established artist experimenting with abstract forms and modern materials. While Fallen Astronaut seems like an anomaly, it fit naturally within his existing body of work. It shared the same minimalist aesthetic, the same focus on clean lines and abstract representation. It was, in essence, a miniature extension of his larger sculptural explorations. The placement of the Fallen Astronaut on the moon catapulted Van Hoeydonck into the international spotlight. While the controversy surrounding the attempted sale of the replicas created some legal challenges, the event undeniably solidified his reputation as a pioneering artist. It also, perhaps inadvertently, overshadowed some of his other work. After 1971, Van Hoeydonck continued to push boundaries in his art. He explored new materials and techniques, always seeking new ways to express his artistic vision. In the 1970s, he designed a series of unique art cars for BMW. These cars were driven in the 24-hour Le Mans races. His work often reflected a continued fascination with movement, space, technology, and the human condition. He created sculptures that appeared to float, defying gravity. He experimented with kinetic art, incorporating movement into the pieces. Van Hoeydonck's sculptures are known for their clean lines, abstract forms, and innovative use of materials. Paul van Hoeydonck's career was defined by his relentless pursuit of artistic innovation, his willingness to experiment, and his ability to create art that reflects the spirit of his time. He continued this work, exploring new artistic avenues until his death on November 21st, 2019, leaving behind a substantial and thought-provoking body of work.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.